Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization. It's January 22nd, 2021, and this is your daily update. As you know, the world is going through a great deal of chaos. There's political confusion and tumult and craziness in the United States. And as a result, I receive far more questions than usual, with people trying to figure out what's going on and where do we go from here. So I had to choose the most, I think, poignant themes that need to be addressed. I lumped some of your questions together, so I hope you'll excuse me if your full question is not included, but I think these are the most important topics that have to be answered. So let me just get started. The first one is, what do you think of Joe Biden's call for unity in his inauguration address? Well, I can't be charitable at all. This was a complete fraud, and if he has any conscious capability, he'd be ashamed and embarrassed by what he said. Look at what he and the people who put him into office have been doing, which is certainly not in the cause of unity, but in fact polarizing the country even more. The impeachment, for example, of Donald Trump was unnecessary and foolish. It never took up the actual issues that were raised by this, which is that why, if people had pre-planned this attack on the Congress, you can accuse President Trump of inciting them. If there was notification that plans were there for attacking the Congress, why was there not adequate support and security to stop it? So there's a lot of the impeachment, which is a complete fraud and needs to be investigated. Besides the impeachment, you have the threat of civil and criminal cases against Trump, his family, and his businesses. These have been part of the Democratic Party talking points. He's corrupt, he's immoral. How does this bring about a cause of unity? The censorship. Who's doing it? It's the big tech companies that supported Joe Biden in the presidential campaign. The same networks that are involved in the censorship are now canceling bank accounts, credit card accounts of Trump and his supporters. And then you have the criminalization of opposition, whether it's calling them racists or terrorists who need to be investigated. Clinton and Pelosi, Hillary Clinton and Pelosi, calling for a 9/11 style commission to find out more about Trump's criminal intent. CNN going so far as to say that we need a deprogrammer because the supporters of Trump are part of a cult. That's being done by Biden supporters, including leading officials in the Democratic Party. So how is that going to bring about unity in the country? So Mrs. LaRouche yesterday laid out a strategy that could bring about unity, namely have the United States adopt the policies of her late husband for a four-power agreement, for the four laws, and I'll get to that in a couple moments, but policies that will revive the United States as an industrial and agricultural power and restore the vitality of our economy and give people productive jobs, living wages, decent health care, transportation, education. That's how you bring about unity. But just calling for unity and saying you're going to do these things without a program, no, that's just a fraud. And Biden should be ashamed of himself, although I don't think he has that capacity. Second question, what happened with Q? Now, I'll ask you, if you're a Q supporter, do you still trust the plan? Last night I heard several of the interpreters of Q who said, oh, something big went wrong with the plan. Well, I thought this plan was foolproof, that it had been in works for years. And now we're told March 4th or the middle of April. Well, how many times have you been told something was going to happen? Mass arrests, military tribunals. How many times were you told things that turned out not to be true that you forgot about? Like a firefight in Frankfurt between the SEALs and the CIA to seize the servers that were used to switch the vote. It never happened. But how many of you were hoping that was true? How about the idea that the election was a sting with watermarks in every ballot? Did that happen? If it did, and Trump knew about it, Why was it not presented in the court to overturn the election fraud? How about Hillary in an ankle bracelet, Joe Biden in an ankle bracelet, Gina Haspel either killed in Frankfurt or in Gitmo? I saw her in Washington the other day. She just handed in her resignation. How about JFK Jr. coming back as Trump's vice president? Now, some of what you were told in the Q drops about the nature of the coup attempt and the people involved in it were true. But you could have found that out from reading our publications. The LaRouche organization had massive coverage, regular coverage. I did a lot of it, going through the corruption of the criminal cabal that was running the attacks on Donald Trump. What Q represents is a kind of video war game designed probably by brainwashers of Tavistock Institute collaborating with DARPA, that is the military side of artificial intelligence, designing a game that would seduce you into sitting down every single day as though you're following your favorite soap opera or a fantasy sports league or something. Every day there's something new to talk about with your friends. Ah, did you hear the latest? Yeah, John Brennan has been arrested. The Pope has been killed. You get this flow of information, and what does it do? It causes you to emotionally connect increasingly to events that are highly unlikely, or if they happened, had nothing to do with the so-called good guys on white horses riding into the rescue. That's the kind of fantasy that many of you bought into. Now, we're going to be doing more research on this, more of an investigation. But again, think about it. Since mid-December, you've been told, get ready, stay inside, trust the plan. It's working. Well, you don't have to do anything, they said. It's going to happen without you. Well, look what happened. Now, if you're depressed, if you feel let down, let me tell you something. You can pull yourself out of it. We have work to do. We still have to defeat this criminal cabal. There is a criminal cabal. They were engaged in a conspiracy. The media and big tech is a part of it. Big Pharma is a part of it. The CIA, elements in the FBI and NSA are a part of it. But let's identify them and work together to defeat them, as opposed to waiting for this mythical army of God-fearing white hats riding down from the heavens on white horses to vanquish the bad guys. The bad guys are real. The evil is real. But the alternative is an educated population that's mobilized. Now, that gets to the next question. What is the post-election strategy? Well, one of the things we have to do is use the declassification that's supposed to be coming to educate people to know who the enemy is. We've been reporting on this. I've been reporting on this from day one. It's British intelligence. And the document that came out on Christopher Steele makes this clear. Steele said he went to the Hillary Clinton campaign because he was worried that Trump would break the relationship between the British and the United States, the so-called special relationship. Well, we covered that 2.5, 3 years ago. The point is that people need to know who the enemy is. And operations like Q diverted you, including recently diverted you to think China somehow stole the election, when all the real evidence points to the U.S. intelligence community working with the British intelligence community, the so-called Five Eyes. So get the real story, and we'll be providing it as these documents hopefully come out. Now, secondly, a positive program. That's what you need more than anything else. What will break the power of this enemy? Well, an alliance of sovereign nations, which is what LaRouche proposed with his four-power agreement. Go to our website and look that up. The U.S., Russia, China, and India working together are more powerful than the British Empire, more powerful than the alliance of central banks who are trying to establish a global bankers' dictatorship. A sovereign nation can seize a central bank or the private banks that control the central banks. We can force them to go through a bankruptcy reorganization because most of these banks, which seem so all-powerful, are technically bankrupt. Even the central banks are sitting on top of trillions of dollars of worthless assets, which they keep in the positive side on their books by printing money, which is actually what's destroying your future. So we need an alliance of the four powers for a new Bretton Woods system, and we need LaRouche's four laws. And we need to recruit an organic leadership from among the 75 million Trump voters who will know who the enemy is and know how to defeat them. And will not sit back and wait for the so-called good guys to come in, but will become part of the good guys themselves. Now, next question, why did Trump not pardon Assange? He should have. He knew plenty about Assange. The fact is that Assange was exposing the war crimes of the same criminals who were running Russiagate, the Ukraine impeachment, and so on. I've been told that Mitch McConnell communicated to Trump that if he pardoned Assange, which would expose the allies of the war hawks in the Senate and the House, that they would go ahead and convict him at his trial. That's a very credible threat. There's also a credible threat that Trump was told that if he pardoned Assange, those same networks would make sure that he and his children went to prison after he left the White House. Hopefully that's true as opposed to Trump not knowing. I think he knew, I think he intended to, but I think this was a case where they used the threats of their power to subvert him. And we still need to work to get Julian Assange out of prison, to pardon Snowden, because these are people who expose the crimes of the enemies of the United States. And at the same time, we must exonerate Lyndon LaRouche, who before Assange and before Snowden was telling us the truth about this criminal network. Finally, the question of how do you develop the emotional connection to reason that enables you to stand up and feel good about yourself in this kind of world that's driven by craziness, corruption, lies, and so on. Well, this is where you have to go to the great classical works to strengthen that part of you, your soul, so to speak, that can give you the strength to do good in the face of evil. That you know that you're acting for the future, for future generations, and that your life is meaningful because you're doing that. And that you have the creative capability to not only develop new ideas and understand the complexities, but then have the courage to act on it. Classical culture is remarkable in this. I find myself quite often sitting down watching a part of a Mozart opera, because I usually don't have time to watch the whole thing, or listening to a Beethoven symphony or a string quartet by Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven, and get involved in the process of thinking of the composer. How did they do that? How did they know to resolve this passage, this counterpoint in a way that brings you to a higher understanding of what the process is? And if you can do that through classical culture, by using your mind to connect with the mind of a creative genius from 200 or 300 years ago, or even several thousand years ago, such as Plato or St. Augustine, that gives you the strength from knowing that human beings have always possessed this creative power, and throughout history there have been people courageous enough to stand up and wage a fight for what they knew was true and right. And I think that can give you the strength to do it. And we need that today. We need that because we're going into very perilous times, and we need a movement of creative, courageous people who will take on the so-called deep state, the enemies of humanity, the satanic forces. Since these are people who want to reduce the world population through genocidal policies, they are properly called satanic. We can win this fight, but it requires that quality of emotional connection to reason that comes from immersing yourself in classical culture. So thank you for your questions. Thanks for joining me. Share this video, get your friends involved, and I'll see you next week.